The digital transformation playbook for 2026, Zimmer Biomet's $172 million SAP failure, and $10 billion being invested in Portugal's AI data hub. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 249 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 249. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation with no sales or marketing spin. We cover everything related to strategy, people, process, and technology in digital transformations. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And joining me, as always, is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm excited for another episode.
Yes, fun episode today. We've got a lot of cool stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to first get to some questions off of social media. We're going to talk about some newsworthy topics, some new stuff happening in the market. One is a $10 billion investment in Portugal's AI data hub. We're going to talk about how Marzetti is strengthening digital foundation for an AI rollout. And then we're going to talk with the audience about some digital transformation diagnostic playbook items for 2026. We're going to talk about sort of a trends and predictions episode or discussion around what to expect in 2026 and how to plan for your transformation in the coming year or years. And then finally, late in the show, our third segment, we'll cover a case study. Zimmer Biomet is a medical device company that recently had a SAP S/4HANA failure that was close to $200 million. We'll talk about what went wrong and what some of the lessons are in that case study. So all that being said, let's get started with some of these social media questions you've got for us, Darian.
Yeah, some good questions today. So this first one, Eric, is about Odoo, which is always a good topic on this podcast. The question is, what is the basic difference between Odoo functional and technical modules?
Yeah, I mean, people love to talk about Odoo. It's like the most cultish following of any software vendor in the marketplace. If I had to do like a top 10 ranking of top 10 cultish following or followers for an ERP provider, Odoo would for sure be number one by a long shot. So anyway, having said that, let's get to your real question here, which is what is the difference between the functional and technical modules of Odoo?
Yep.
So Odoo is pretty cool in that an end user or a business user, non-technical type, can set up basic functionality in terms of just configuring the software and setting up basic workflows and getting configured in a way that can work. But then it also has a more advanced set of technical modules that allow you to do more deeper dive customization. I was at their Odoo Connect conference in North America a few months ago, and they showed this AI tool that they have where even an end user or a non-technical type person could create a whole new module within Odoo that doesn't exist yet, to do something very specific to your business or to do something that Odoo can't do out of the box. You can create your own module within Odoo using an AI tool that will actually write the code that will allow you to create that module. So they do have a functional or a technical platform that allows you to customize the software and build on top of what Odoo does out of the box, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And like we said, there's always a lot of comments and a lot of people cheering on Odoo. So I'm sure we'll have more questions about them in the future. But our next question today is, I have done several implementations of S2K by VAI with some of my clients. Is S2K on your radar?
Yes. If by on your radar, you mean it's something that we would recommend or suggest to clients, then yes, it's definitely, it's not as well known of a product as, some of the bigger names in the market like Microsoft and Oracle and even Odoo and SAP, et cetera. But it is a very niche-y sort of solution for a lot of industrial manufacturers. Find that could be a good fit. It's a good, solid mid-tier provider for industrial manufacturers. It doesn't have quite, in addition to not having the brand name and the brand recognition, it also doesn't have quite as extensive of an implementation network or ecosystem of people that know the product to be able to implement it well. But if you're a smaller or mid-size organization, you might find that you get more attention, and it could be a better focused fit in a lighter fit that's not as complex as one of the bigger systems that maybe does have better name recognition and does have more of an ecosystem supporting it. So in the right situation, it can be a really good fit, but it's not the best fit for every company. I mean, they're very focused on what they do, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about recognition and bigger vendors, we're going to switch into our first newsworthy article of today, and it is about one of the biggest vendors, and that's Microsoft, and how they're investing $10 billion into Portugal AI Data Hub. I know we've talked a lot on here about different investments companies are making, and this is just the latest one. So Microsoft announced, again, another $1 billion investment. This one's $10 billion into the AI data center campus in Sines, I think, Portugal. I don't know if I'm saying that fully correctly. This project will be carried out in a partnership with Portuguese developer Stuart Campus, potentially, and British AI infrastructure Nscale. The site is being positioned as a major European AI factory hub with one building already operational and more planned. Part of the plan includes deploying next generation GPUs, reported that it's approximately over 12,000 units from NVIDIA for advanced AI workloads. So some key takeaways from this was the partner strategy over pure build. So rather than building entirely in-house, Microsoft is using partnerships to scale faster, a notable shift in their infrastructure sourcing. And then the risks and complexities rise with scale. So big bets like this carry long-term execution and regulatory supply chain energy risk. And that's relevant for enterprise CIOs watching hyperscaler behavior. Eric, with this, I know we've talked a lot about different investments companies are making, but how do you think enterprises should think about their own AI infrastructure strategy when hyperscalers are making continental scale commitments like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's why the hyperscalers are so effective at what they do and why so many organizations want to work with the hyperscalers, because most companies can't match the size and scale of the cloud infrastructure that Amazon and Microsoft and some of the other big tech providers have provided. So I think, on one hand, there's a cost and efficiency play here as far as knowing that someone else can provide that infrastructure for probably a lot cheaper than you could in terms of building your own cloud data center or whatever. It just, they've got the capabilities, the scale, all that stuff to be able to do it for less money. They also are more likely to be able to create the redundancy and the diversification of location and all that good stuff in building that infrastructure. I think the challenge, though, is that, and this gets back to the AWS outages that we talked about on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, where, you get more of a bullseye on you, or if you have an internal cybersecurity breach or a technical issue that brings down your infrastructure, you're not just affecting one company, you're affecting thousands of companies and potentially millions of customers, as in the case of the AWS outages. There's a lot of people that were affected by that here in the last few weeks. So, there's a downside risk to that consolidation of hyperscalers, but it's hard to compete with it. I mean, for most organizations, it doesn't make sense to go invest in your own or to go with a smaller provider that isn't as efficient or doesn't have the redundancy or the global geographic reach that you need to ensure that your data, where your data is, it's in the right place, or it's in a country or location where it can or should be. All that stuff is something that, mostly just big hyperscalers are able to provide.
For sure. And with the hyperscalers investing hugely everywhere, I mean, I feel like there's a news article every other week about a new investment. How might this influence the availability and cost, I guess, of GPU compute for enterprise digital transformation over the next year or so?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you have two competing trends or forces. I mean, one is that because there's so much demand for GPUs and computing power, it's bringing the cost down because there's so much mass production of those tools or those components that are needed, which on a per unit basis brings down the cost. But when you've got uh, this mad rush to build that infrastructure, there's a lot of demand, which could actually drive up the end price to customers, even if the cost is lower for the producers. We have a client who's not at all in the tech space, or they're not a tech provider, but they're a industrial component provider, and they actually produce pipes. But they've historically provided pipes and piping solutions for industrial manufacturers or other industrial types of applications. But the company is really taking off because now they found a use for it in building these data centers. So building piping for the coolants that go into cool off a data center and things like that. They're just having a mass rush of demand for pipes, which is not at all cool, or it's not like what you're talking about, GPUs or semiconductors or technical type stuff. But you just see this, you see how it's affecting their business, and it's creating more market share for them. Their revenues shooting through the roof, and so I imagine with this continued arms race towards building these big massive data centers, you're going to have so much demand that it might actually increase the cost longer term. But it creates more competition, and there's more hyperscalers competing for business, which could drive the cost back down. So there's just a lot of competing forces that I don't know where it's going to settle or how it's going to land. But I think the net effect will probably be lower costs for customers longer term.
For sure. And one more question on this. What role will partnerships with data center developers and neo cloud providers like Nscale play in the enterprise stack for the coming years? And what does it mean for vendor strategy and ecosystem architecture?
Well, I think it's consistent with where most big tech providers are going in the B2B space, especially. I mean, B2C is a different story, but and it's a space I don't know as well. But in the B2B space where we play, where we're helping companies invest in new technology to run their businesses, those software providers that are providing that sort of technology are definitely going to cloud. They're investing heavily in hosting their applications in the cloud, and so I think it's part of a broader trend and a broader ecosystem that's being built to support that cloud first environment that most providers are moving towards.
For sure. So our next newsworthy article today is about Marzetti, and they're strengthening their digital foundation for AI rollout. Their ERP modernization was a launchpad and not a finish line for them. So they are a food manufacturer. The company T. Marzetti has completed a multi-year modernization of its ERP environment, standardizing core operations across plant, supply chain, and finance before expanding enterprise-wide AI analytics and initiatives. The new ERP foundation now enables predictive maintenance, demand forecasting, and smarter production scheduling across its portfolio of brands. Why this matters is it's a textbook example of ERP done right. So instead of rushing to bolt on AI, Marzetti built digital maturity in stages. So phase 1 was standardize and clean up core transactional systems. Phase 2 was integrate data flows across plants, finance, and logistics. Phase 3, layer AI and analytics to drive efficiency and insight. For digital transformation leaders, the lesson is clear. ERP modernization isn't just the destination, it's the foundation for unlocking real value. So some key takeaways for transformations teams that they can take was modernize, then optimize, treat your ERP as infrastructure, not an event, cross-functional alignment wins, and proof of maturity. So their case shows how manufacturing firms can future-proof operations by linking ERP and AI roadmaps into one cohesive strategy. I think this is kind of a nice mix-up compared to a lot of failures that we talk about a lot of time. It's also good to learn from how people successfully completed an ERP implementation. So with this, Eric, 1, what is your first takeaway? And 2, Marzetti took a phased approach to ERP first, then AI. How important is that in sequencing in transformation success? And what happens when companies reverse it?
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. And we see more companies wanting to take that approach. And I think it's something that a lot of software vendors are advocating for, is to get the platform or get the application stack in place first and just get the basics in place and then figure out how you're going to build on it, innovate, optimize, as you mentioned. And I think the challenge here is, you don't want that to be an excuse not to do it right or to cut scope so much that, you just quote unquote get it done. Because a lot of times companies, they spend so much time and money trying to get to the finish line or to what they perceive to be the finish line. And they're so tired and exhausted and just ready to get back to their real day jobs that they just leave it. They just leave the system basically automating what they already had. And there's no real net benefit. There's no innovation. There's no lift to the business value that you expected or hoped to get out of the software. So you can do, I'm not opposed to what you're saying. It's just that a lot of organizations, it backfires for a lot of organizations where they don't ever get to that point of innovation or optimization because they spend so much time and money just trying to get a basic slimmed down scope in place. And even that doesn't go well. So the last thing they want to do is go now try and figure out how to innovate, make things better and fine tune and optimize. They're just sick and tired of implementing and doing tech stuff at that point. Now that's where your IT team can come in. Some of the business analysts and the business systems users or business systems support people. Maybe that's the role they can play longer term. But, if you can, a lot of times it's, I know I'm speaking out of both sides here, but a lot of times it's like, if you're going to go through the implementation, try to be a little more aggressive or try to set a little bit higher of a bar rather than just trying to get the core MVP in place. This whole agile approach where let's just get a minimum viable product in place, which is just basic functionality. And then we'll build on top of that. I don't know, that backfires for a lot of big companies because you never get to that point of innovation. And again, you get so hung up in the basic core MVP stuff that you can't even get to that. And then, that's a whole nother issue. I'm not saying it's the MVP approach or the agile approach necessarily that's wrong. It's just that a lot of times organizations mismanage their projects so badly that they can't ever get to the MVP, or they make it a lot more complicated than it needs to be to get to the MVP, and then they never get to the innovation stage of the project. So I think as long as you've got a clear strategy and you've got alignment around what you want to get out of that first phase and future phases of the project, and you're realistic about it and you execute well, then sure, go ahead and do it. The problem is most companies, no matter what they set as the end state or that milestone for the implementation, so many companies or so few companies don't ever get there, or it's so much turmoil and chaos to get there that they don't ever get to the future phases. So it's a long way of saying, just if companies could just manage their digital transformations better, then they could do what you're saying. But the problem is they don't manage them well, so they never get to that point of innovation and true business value.
For sure. And from your experience, Eric, what's the best way to evaluate whether your ERP vendor's ecosystem will support future AI analytics and integration, or just the future of your business as well?
One of the things I look at, that's an interesting question because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Like, I've been trying to think lately, who are the winners and losers going to be in the next 5 to 10 years? Because I think the whole market's going to be upended, and I think it'll probably look a lot different in 5 to 10 years, just because there's so much competition now. AI is disrupting the traditional ERP space and enterprise tech space. So I think we're going through a transition phase where the big, if you look at the top 10 players by market share, I think that top 10 list is going to look totally different in 5 or 10 years, because you'll have some new names on there that we haven't heard of yet, or they don't seem like a big deal now, but they will end up becoming a big deal. And some of the big incumbent, historic leaders might fall off the radar. And so, so I think that now I forget your question. I was going down That's
okay. What's the best way to evaluate whether the vendor's ecosystem will support future? Yeah.
So where I was going with that is, so I look at companies like, there's some companies like Salesforce has done this for a long time. NetSuite starting to do it. Trying to think here. There's others too that I'm for. Infor I think is starting to do it. QAD is doing it. Some of these big. Microsoft, of course. Microsoft is probably the pioneer of this model, which is we create a platform and we let other people build on top of it, or we let them modify the applications we've built. We let them modify it for specific industries or functions or whatever. Microsoft has done that for a long time, but you're starting to see Salesforce do it. You're starting to see NetSuite do it, which if NetSuite is doing it, in my opinion, if NetSuite is doing this, that means that tells me a lot, because NetSuite is a SaaS multi-cloud provider where this model on paper shouldn't make sense, but they've made it make sense and it's become part of their strategy, which tells me they must even recognize that building a whole ecosystem is more important than just having the one answer in one application. So I think the ones that will end up, I think those are the companies that are going to thrive in the future. I think the ones that are in trouble are going to be SAP because they have such a closed ecosystem. I don't think that model is sustainable. I don't think it'll last long. The only thing that's going to save them is that they have such big companies that are using their products that's going to keep them alive for decades to come, even if they're not a successful, innovative company for much longer. So SAP, I think, will struggle with this model, or they'll have to change, which I don't think they will, but they'll have to change if they want to thrive and be that number one player for the long term. Oracle is sort of in the middle. I think they might. They have an okay ecosystem, or they're getting better at it. Microsoft has always had a pretty robust ecosystem. So anyway, a long way of saying, if you look at what I would do is I would look at the platform you get, not just the applications. What's the platform? How do I build on it? If I've got an IT staff and I want to build some custom apps, or I want to modify something, how easy is that to do in that environment? Is it a proprietary tool set? Is it something that I can go hire people myself to do rather than having to be dependent on a software vendor? And then also just look at the number of third-party options you have and third-party applications. If you look at Microsoft, they have a ton of third-party applications, almost too many that it's hard to navigate. Same as Salesforce. You get a lot of people that have built applications on the Salesforce platform. So you just look at the robustness and the breadth of applications available, which will help you now, but it'll also be an indicator of in the future how much more innovation will there be that you don't even know about yet. So that's what I would do, is just look at the provider, get an objective view, of who some of those providers are, and then assess it from there.
For sure. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And that kind of leads us nicely into the conversation today, which I'm excited to learn about because it's all about 2026 and ERP, AI, different things like that.
Yeah, we're going to jump into some of the digital transformation playbook that you need for 2026. And we're also going to talk about some of the trends, within that, what the things are that we think are going to happen and emerge in 2026. And these are things we try to focus on, things that are specific to what you would need for your digital strategy. We're not just going to talk about cool new bells and whistles or cool new technologies that are emerging. It's more about general categories and trends that affect you as a leader and as a potential enterprise buyer. So we're going to dive into that here with the audience here in just a moment. We're also going to get into the Zimmer Biomet SAP failure case study. It's a big, massive, nearly $200 million project that failed miserably. We're going to talk about what that means to other SAP projects, or how you can avoid that with other SAP projects, or any sort of digital transformation in general, even if you're not deploying SAP. So be sure to stick around for all that. We're going to cover this and more. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
Wake me up, wake me up inside. I can't wake up. Wake me up and save me. Call my name and save me.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 249. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. This is the tech agnostic podcast that we release weekly, covers everything related to digital strategy, including the people, process, and technology sides of change. This podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech agnostic consulting company that can help your organization through your digital transformation journey. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. And I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to dive into some of the digital transformation plays in a playbook that you should be ready for in 2026. And included in this conversation is going to be some of the trends we expect to see in 2026. What's changing the enterprise tech space, and how does that affect the way you might define and execute your digital strategy? So that's what we're going to cover here today. I guess I want to start in with one of the most common issues that we see here today, and one of the most common questions we get in the marketplace is around AI. You know, obviously there's a lot of buzz, a lot of hype, probably overhype around AI, and we get the question oftentimes is, you know, what's the real deal with AI? We hear all about it. We see all these big valuations of NVIDIA and you know, even Google and Microsoft are getting these huge valuations as companies because of their investments in AI. And investors right now are chasing that next big AI wave and trying to cash in on whoever's going to be the winner in the AI space. So, you know, the question then becomes, well, what does that mean to us as enterprise tech buyers? Is this a real thing? Is it real yet? Is it something to think about in the future? And you know, I guess I would say it's a mixed bag here. We have a lot of companies that are asking us about AI, of course, even if they come to us wanting a traditional enterprise technology like an ERP system or CRM or an HR technology, a supply chain system, whatever it is. Even if they're coming to us with that traditional ask of, hey, help us select and implement a new system of some sort, a lot of times what they're really thinking about in the background is, well, how do we embed AI or factor AI into this whole thing? That's a big question that companies have is, do I need my ERP vendor or my off the shelf standard, you know, monolithic enterprise tech provider to provide the AI? Can I go get a third party AI provider? Is AI the right thing? Should I be focused on other stuff? Those are all things that organizations should be thinking about. And you know, there's a lot of different options, a lot of different directions that organizations can go here. We have a handful of clients right now that have come to us and said, hey, look, we don't want we don't want a big, massive investment in ERP right now or any sort of enterprise tech system because, you know, we've got other priorities. We don't have the budget, or we're not ready to take on the risk, or perhaps we have an existing legacy system that is working just fine and we're not ready to replace it. And so a lot of companies will say, well, can we still take advantage of AI? And the answer is yes. There are ways that you can leverage AI tools and take an AI first strategy. But the tricky part is that it's not an end all be all. It's not a silver bullet. It's still, you know, got its own risks and challenges and whatnot. So, you know, we have I'd say we have 3 or 4 clients right now where they're saying we're going to punt on the ERP, you know, off the shelf traditional ERP solution, and we're going to go with a more AI driven strategy. So we're going to focus more on how we can, you know, leverage AI now and get those capabilities and the automation and the insights and the visibility and all that stuff we want. But we're going to do it with AI instead of ERP. And a lot of times it's companies that are using a fairly moderately new system like a, you know, SAP ECC or an Oracle EBS, or a system that maybe is 10 or 15 years old. It's not old, but it's not brand spanking new. And so there's still value to be left to get out of those systems. So they're not quite ready to rip it out and replace it with a whole new system. And so they'll look at options to leverage AI. And so that is where a lot of organizations are looking to third-party systems to potentially pursue AI strategies. The key here, though, is that you have to still do a lot of legwork, a lot of foundational stuff to prepare for an AI initiative. So you still need to clean up your data. You still need to define what it is you want to get out of AI. It's not enough just to say we're going to pursue an AI first strategy and let's throw some AI tools at it, at the business, and see what sticks. There's a structured way you want to go through that to be deliberate and make sure you're not wasting time and money and resources on things that aren't of value to the organization. So, you know, looking at ways that we can leverage AI tools on top of the stack we already have is an option. But you have to focus on, just like any other tech initiative, you've got to focus on your business process, future state. You've got to define on your vision of what you want. You've got to clean up your data and make sure the data supports an AI-driven strategy. And those are just some of the things that are needed to cover that there. And then, of course, with AI, the one thing we have to worry about is that AI has more of an impact on people, even more of an impact than traditional enterprise technology. In the past, enterprise tech was really focused on, from a change perspective, it was focused more on, a new tool set. Yes, it's a different platform. Yes, it's a new way of doing things. But AI is a whole nother transformative experience for employees in a positive and negative way. I mean, the net is hopefully positive long term, but in the short term, it can actually be more negative and more disruptive because it's so different, because it's more of a threat to the average employee than a traditional ERP system or commercial off-the-shelf enterprise tech. So you have to be prepared that organizational change management and the resistance to change is actually greater for AI. It's greater than I've ever seen in my experience in the marketplace. Again, largely because there's so much hype around AI, which creates skepticism. There's so many headlines in the media about jobs being lost or displaced as a result of AI, which creates fear and doubt around the net benefit of AI, especially as it relates to us as individuals. Is my job secure? I don't know. In an AI world, I don't know if my job's secure. I know it's going to change significantly, but I don't know how. I don't know if I'm going to have a job. There's a lot more uncertainty that's being created with AI. And so change management becomes even more important, but yet organizations are tending to get more and more bogged down in the technology itself, especially with something as unknown and unproven as AI. When I say unproven, I don't mean the AI technology doesn't work. I just mean that it's unproven in the business to business space. I think we're all comfortable with, or a lot of us are comfortable using ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or whatever, in our personal lives day to day. But as far as a structured, formal way of using AI in a business setting, that's largely unproven. There's not a lot of organizations out there that have really taken it the distance to really test out and roll out AI capabilities at scale, unless you're a high-tech provider like a Facebook or an Amazon or someone like that who's been deploying AI for decades now. Most of us are not Amazon or Facebook, and so most of us don't have that competency or that experience. So looking to see where AI takes us is something that's super critical, and something that I think will be more and more important in 2026 and beyond. And just recognizing that you don't have to rip out your old systems to leverage AI. There are things you have to do. You have to have a clear strategy and a deliberate strategy, but you don't necessarily need to rip out your old system just to get to that point where maybe someday, if you survive your ERP or your enterprise tech rollout, maybe then, just maybe, you could leverage AI at that point. Most organizations don't need to go through that necessarily. Now, there are some that we work with that are due for a ERP or CRM or HR tech replacement. And so it makes sense for them to first replace their core back office systems and then leverage AI later. But you just have to be mindful and deliberate about how you go about it. And by the way, it's okay if you're not using AI in the next year or 2 years, if the bigger priority is to fix your back office systems first and then leverage AI. That's much better approach than trying to force fit AI into a situation where you're just not ready for it, or you're not going to get the value out of it. And it can actually become more of a distraction and something that backfires if you don't have a deliberate, clear strategy for that. But I'd love to hear from you. Where are you seeing AI fit into your organization? I'd love to hear any use cases or examples you have. And I'm going to manually look at all the streams here while we're talking. So if you see me distracted, it's because I'm looking at multiple streams trying to figure out how to see everything that people are saying here. So bear with me 1 second while I pull up some of these other streams here. So that's the view on AI. And one last thing I'll say here is that your enterprise tech provider may make you feel like, or may try to make you think that you need to use their platform to fully leverage AI. But the reality is you don't. I mean, you can, the cool thing about AI, which I suppose is good news and bad news, but the cool thing about AI is that you don't necessarily need the best and sexiest new technology. You just need something that has a solid data foundation. You need to know where to go to get the data, and you need to train your people and ensure that organizationally you have the right operational processes and the training of people in place. And once you have all that stuff in place, you can still leverage AI without necessarily replacing all your back office systems. Okay, so we actually have a question here on LinkedIn. And again, I apologize. I can't do my usual thing where I pull up the questions on the screen because of my technical issue here. But on YouTube, I have a question here from Gurveen. First of all, thank you, Gurveen, for being here. Gurveen says, is S4HANA one of the best ERPs with AI implemented? It probably is. If I'm looking for an ERP system that has invested fairly significantly in AI and has AI capabilities, I'd say SAP's probably up there, but there's still a lot of smoke and mirrors behind SAP's AI strategy. And it's not just SAP. I think all the major ERP providers are guilty of this to some degree. They're overstating the maturity of their AI capabilities, and they're creating a lot of AI agents and AI workflows and things that are either not available yet or on the roadmap versus actually being used at scale. And or there's so many different things they're creating or working on that it can get overwhelming, and you're not going to consume all of that quickly, and nor should you. So being real deliberate and understanding that this is a moving target, that AI, especially for the traditional incumbent enterprise tech providers like SAP, they're still not, they're nowhere close to where some of the AI native applications are in providing AI capabilities. I think other platforms like Salesforce seems to be a bit ahead of the pack as well. They seem to be heavily invested in agentic AI. You have some providers, and I'll call out two vendors in particular, Infor and QAD in particular are two larger tier 2 platforms and application providers that have invested heavily in an AI platform that can be used not just for their core products, but it can also be used for other third-party systems too. So I think those providers are actually ahead of the curve and have a better offering, because SAP is still closed off largely to any third-party systems. It's still not an open, easy system to integrate with others. Whereas some providers like, I'll say, Salesforce, QAD, Infor, some of these other application providers are focusing more on creating an AI platform that's agnostic. You can use it not just with their application suite, but also with other third parties. So I think that's where the market is headed. Simply because freedom of choice and having different options and having flexibility is something that's very important, and it creates and reduces the need for vendor lock as well. If you have more of a platform that can integrate with multiple systems, that gives you more freedom, more control over your tech stack. It also gives you a lot more flexibility as well. So I think that's where the market is going to head there. And I think some of these providers that are investing more in creating an open AI architecture, I think they're in much better. I think they're better positioned than an SAP that is, yes, creating AI tools, but it's primarily focused on AI within the SAP ecosystem rather than AI that can be used within the SAP ecosystem and other third-party options as well. So that's my opinion on it. But I'd love to hear from anyone here in the SAP community or anyone who's deploying SAP, or if you've tried Joule, which is their AI tool set. If you've got use cases that are wildly successful, I'd love to hear about them, because we still have we have mostly companies that are struggling just to get S4HANA up and running. Forget about Joule and AI for a minute. They're having trouble just getting the basic core financials, inventory management, and the other stuff within S4HANA to work for them. So for us personally, the clients we're working with are struggling so much, and that's why they've hired us, is because they're struggling so much with their S4HANA implementations that they're nowhere near really seriously thinking about AI, at least not at this point as we're recording this conversation. So I want to actually that leads us into another couple predictions I have in my predictions and my thoughts for 2026, and in terms of how you go about defining your strategy for the coming year. Before I jump into this, though, I want to share with you one thing real quickly, and this is part of what we're doing here at the year end. We always like to get to know as many companies as possible and understand what your strategies are, where you're struggling, where you might need help. And we're actually offering a series of free assessments for organizations that are looking for help, either assessing their current project that might already be underway, or if you're thinking about getting started on a new project and you're just looking for ideas and that outside support and outside assessment of what you're thinking, and give you some ideas and validation, maybe some refinement suggestions on your overall project. Check out the free assessment right here. If you scan the QR code, we'll drop it in the chat as well. You scan that code and it'll take you to a website where you can schedule time to meet with one of our consultants and to meet with our team at no cost, just to help assess and validate your line of thinking and give you ideas and suggestions on how you might improve it. So feel free to scan that QR code and pick our brains as we help lots of different companies throughout the world with their digital transformations. There's a lot of good lessons we can share, and we're tech agnostic. So we're independent. We're not affiliated with any software vendors. So anything we tell you or suggest to you is only coming from the lens of what's best for you, not what's best for a software vendor or what kind of software someone might want to sell you, because we don't sell software. We don't make money off you buying software or not. So keep that in mind as well. So I'll leave that up there for a moment for you to scan. If you'd like to have a chat with us, please feel free to take advantage of that offer. So this leads us to another prediction or thought for 2026, and that is that composable ERP is slowly becoming the standard. 10, 20 years ago, certainly when I started my career in the 90s, it was extremely uncommon to not want to pursue something other than a one-size-fits-all single monolithic ERP strategy. In other words, if you can get one system to do everything you want, that is the perfect ideal state, and it largely still is. If you could find that one system that could do everything you ever wanted under the sun and still give you flexibility and still give you control, then great, have at it. The problem is that's just not the reality of today. And you add to the fact that now you've got the rise of best of breed systems that have become better in many ways at doing different things that ERP systems cannot do well. A great example that has been brewing for decades now is, or two examples actually, Workday and Salesforce. Those are two companies that are large powerhouses now, but the way they emerged in the space is by picking off part of ERP that wasn't done well, or at least they thought wasn't being done well. And they tried to create a mousetrap or a solution that did that function better. So Salesforce tried to create a world-class CRM system that would do CRM better than an SAP or an Oracle or a Microsoft ever could. Workday tried to create a an HR technology that was world-class, that did HR technology and HCM better than SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, and all those guys. And now, of course, both companies have grown and evolved into these massive enterprise tech powerhouses that are much more than that. But that's how they started. They started off by picking off these little niches and these little weaknesses of vulnerabilities of ERP systems, and they attacked that weakness and created a whole market around it. And as a result, they've both grown into big, massive tech providers. And what we're seeing is the next wave, the next generation of the next Workdays, the next Salesforces. You're starting to see more niche focused solutions, whether it's in the supply chain space or whether it's in HR or financials. Certainly in manufacturing, you're seeing a lot of it. Definitely in AI, you're seeing a lot of it. So you're seeing all these functionally targeted providers that are not trying to be everything to everyone, and they're creating better solutions in many cases than what any one single one-size-fits-all tech provider could offer. And then you add to the fact that now you've got more robust platform as a service types of solutions or integration tools that make it more palatable and easier and less complex and less expensive and less risky than it was in the past to be able to integrate different systems together. 10 or 20 years ago, if you would have asked me, and let's go pursue a best of breed strategy, I'd say don't do that unless you have a really, really good reason of why you'd want to create that level of complexity and risk and cost. Now, though, with tools like Boomi and MuleSoft and other platforms that allow you to integrate systems relatively easy and allows you to create more of a platform, it's not nearly as crazy of an idea to say, let's go ahead and create that spaghetti bowl diagram of systems that we tried to get away from 10 or 20 years ago. Let's go ahead and allow ourselves to have a handful of systems that do things really well, and it's best fit for us as an organization, and we can tie those systems together to create a more composable ERP, which essentially is best of breed or allows you to basically shrink the footprint of your core ERP system and have multiple systems that can do different things really well and tie that together into one system. Now, not only does that give you more flexibility, and not only is it lower cost, lower risk, and less complexity than it was in years past, but it gives you more flexibility. It also minimizes that vendor lock that a lot of companies are struggling with right now. And that's going to lead us to another prediction or another consideration for 2026 that I'll share in a moment. But the vendor lock is a real problem and a real risk for organizations. And I think this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, underlying tectonic shifts that's waiting to happen in the marketplace. And that is the consequences of vendor lock. And we're in a transition stage right now where vendors are trying really hard to get you locked in as much as possible for the next decades to come. And, I'll talk about it in a moment, what the implications of that are, in my opinion. So composable ERP has a lot of benefits because it gives you more flexibility. It gives you, with the right tool set, you can actually integrate these different systems and do things really well that you couldn't do in the past. And it reduces or minimizes the risk of you being locked in to one single vendor. So those are some of the benefits of composable ERP. But again, love to hear your feedback. What are your thoughts on composable ERP versus the one single system source of truth mentality? We're in a transition stage here to where it's almost like a philosophical battle of business models or technology strategies. And it's going to play out over the next several years or decades. But I'd love to hear your predictions on what you think is going to happen there. With composable ERP, we see a lot more clients more than ever pursuing that strategy, by the way. Here's a question coming in on LinkedIn from Christian. And Christian says, good day. Regarding AI, there's a lot of hype from vendors and as consultants. I think the first question will be, what's the goal for the organization to adopt AI? What is your take on this when asked by clients who want to adopt AI? And I would absolutely 100% agree with that. If you want AI, that's great, but it's just like any other shiny, new, cool, sexy technology. It may look cool, new, and sexy, and it may be cool, new, and sexy, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right fit for your organization, nor does it mean that it's going to be a successful project simply because it's cool technology. It has to have a clear purpose. It has to be deliberate. You have to have a clear vision. You have to have clear alignment behind what you want with that. I was with a client just yesterday, actually, doing their kickoff for an SAP project in the United States. And that was one of the big messages from that kickoff from the executive team is, we have these three prioritized goals and objectives that we want to accomplish for this project. And we worked with them over the last, several weeks to help refine that and define what are those objectives and what are the priorities. And we have to stay true to those goals and objectives and priorities. And any decision we make around technology should fit the lens of those priorities. So in their case, they're focused heavily on, making sure that the organization was more data driven. They wanted to make sure that they maximized operational efficiency as a number 2 priority. And then the number 3 priority was to provide a better customer and employee experience to their customers and employees. So that was the forced ranking, if you will, of what the priorities were or are for this organization. And inevitably, when we make technology decisions around whether we're going to roll out a certain module or whether we're going to make customization to a system or do a bolt-on to a core system we're deploying, we should always be looking at it through that clear, deliberate vision or goals and objectives and priorities of the organization. It shouldn't be based on what's cool, new, and sexy, or what your software vendor thinks you should be focused on. You can certainly take that into consideration or take that into advisement, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's right for you. So making sure that you've got that clear, deliberate focus and the clear strategic objectives is something that's really important. So thank you for that, Christian, for that great question and comment there. And thank you for being here, of course. Another question, or I want to say hello to Infrared on YouTube, watching from Dallas, Texas. Thank you for being here today. I want to say hello to Darian, who says good morning. And then Hari on LinkedIn says hello. So thank you all for being here today. And I wish I could flash your names up on the screen like I always do. But again, I'm going to complain about it the entire session here today about how I'm having technical issues. And it's just really going to bother me for the session. So hopefully you're still enjoying the conversation despite that. One other thing that I touched on, I started to get into, and this is a very, I guess you could call this a trigger for me. So bear with me as I pull this up. But I started to allude to vendor lock-in. And this is something that's not cool or fun to talk about, but it is something that every executive, every leader, every organization that's thinking about investing in technology, they absolutely should be thinking about this topic. And that is, how much are we getting locked in to a vendor, and how will we get out of it someday? And that's the way to think about it, is what will I do when it's time to move away from this platform or from this vendor? How hard will it be, and will I realistically be able to do it? Because there are so many organizations out there that it actually freaks me out a little bit. There's so many organizations out there that are locking themselves in for years, if not decades, into certain software vendors, certain platforms. They're going to be really, really hard to move away from. And it's going to give all the leverage to the software vendors. And we have not seen anywhere close to the day of reckoning that we are going to see in this regard. And that is, you think about what's happening here, what's happening in the last 10 years. We started with a migration to the cloud. 10 years ago or so is when it really picked up steam. Now, of course, you had NetSuite and Workday and SuccessFactors and Salesforce. So some of these native SaaS cloud providers had been doing this all along. They just built the solution in the cloud, and that's just how it was. And that was their strategy all along. I'll set those guys aside for a minute. I'm talking more about these incumbent on-premise enterprise tech providers that decided 10 years ago or so that they're going to double down on the cloud and make this big push into the cloud. Nothing wrong with that, right? It's another deployment strategy. It has its benefits. It also has its downsides that few like to talk about, but there are downsides, definite downsides to cloud. And that started really picked up steam about 10 years ago. And at first, it was an option. It was just a deployment option. You could go on-prem, you could go to the cloud, maybe you do some sort of hybrid where you've got some on-prem, some in the cloud. And a lot of organizations are largely still there. But then what happened is these vendors had two things working in their world. One is they realized, I can't support and maintain two different systems, one on-prem, one cloud. So I can't have two, feet in two different camps. I need to double down and get all my R&D dollars consolidated into one platform, one solution. And that makes total sense. I mean, that you can't support multiple systems forever, nor would you want them to as a customer, because that just means they're spread too thin. And depending on what application you're in, you may or may not get the advantages of some of that innovation they're investing in. So I get it. There's a reason why they did it. And then what the real problem became when the investors started getting involved, and these publicly traded companies and the stockholders, shareholders started driving up the stock valuations based on cloud performance and recurring revenue and basically vendor lock. I mean, the more vendor lock these vendors get, and the more they can lock more customers into a cloud environment, the higher their stock price and the higher their share value. So you have this massive, powerful force that is pushing companies and software vendors in particular to push their customers into the cloud. And that's why you start to see companies like SAP, who's doing this forced migration by 2030. They're going to cut off maintenance and support. If you're on ECC, they're going to cut off maintenance and support. And you've got to decide, do you either upgrade S4HANA? Do you just deal with ECC without maintenance and support from SAP? Or do you go find a third-party provider to provide that maintenance and support for you? That's a long way of saying that vendors are working very hard to get you locked in and to get customers locked into the cloud. But what that does is it gives them all the leverage. It gives them all the leverage in terms of controlling your data, controlling your applications, controlling what functionality or workflows you can or can't have as a customer, which is their prerogative. But the question is that right for you as a business? Do you want that? Do you want to cede that control? Do you want to let them have all that control? That's the real question. And then I'd say the biggest thing, this is where I think shit's going to hit the fan, and sorry for the language here, but shit will hit the fan in a few years from now when companies look up and they start to look at their SaaS cloud provider invoices and start to see these skyrocketing, escalating costs. Because you've ceded control to the vendor, they can raise and charge whatever they want. In many cases, in most cases, contractually, they can raise these prices on your subscriptions to whatever they like. And if you, God forbid, get into a situation where, I've got to decide, because I've had a rough quarter, cash flow's tight, maybe the market's dropping off, demand's dropped off, we're having a bad quarter, right? And I've got to decide, am I going to pay my cloud provider, or am I going to make payroll? And let's just say you decide, which you probably would have to decide, I'm going to make payroll because I can't run the business without my employees. So I'm going to make payroll, and you're late making a payment on a SaaS provider invoice, they cut off support and your business is completely shut down. So that's I don't think that is a doomsday scenario or a conspiracy theory. I think that will happen. That is inevitably going to happen, because inevitably there's going to be a customer somewhere someday that can't afford or has cash issues, or maybe they just overlook an invoice, and the cloud provider can absolutely shut down your entire operations because all of your data, all your applications are all in the cloud, and they've got all the leverage. You've got to pay that bill, or you've got to pay whatever they say you need to pay in order to have access to your own data, your own application. So whole nother, I guess that's more of an ethical discussion for another day. But the question becomes, do you want to be in that position? Do you want to introduce yourself to that sort of risk? Right now, we're still in the honeymoon phase of, oh my gosh, cloud's amazing. It's so nice to be able to have someone else hosting your servers and hosting your applications. But the reality is it's very expensive, and you're not going to save money by going to the cloud. You're actually going to spend more. Your capital costs are going to come down, but your operating expenses are going to go way up, more so than your capital costs come down. And they've got all the control on pricing and accessibility, functionality, all that stuff. That's all in control with the software vendor. And as a business owner, as a fellow business owner and leader, that is not a position I ever want to be in. And I sometimes wonder why organizations would want to do that. We're here having a conversation about the trends and predictions for 2026 that you should be aware of as you plan your digital strategy for the coming years. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 249. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Darian Chwialkowski, and we're talking about some of the trends and predictions for 2026, as well as the playbook that's going to help you in your digital transformation in 2026. So here's a question I want to get to here from Mohammed on LinkedIn. Mohammed says, if you're using SAP ECC in your business, what do you choose as the next step in 2026? Migration to SAP ECC to S4HANA, implementing a fresh copy of S4HANA with a new business strategy and keeping ECC as a standalone system, or keeping ECC as the core of data and data input and integrating multiple third-party solutions based on need? That's a really good question. And actually, all three of those strategies are feasible or relevant. I could make a case for any one of those three. Let's start with, I'll go quickly through these. So the migration from SAP to ECC to S4HANA, I might do that if I was sure that S4HANA had the capabilities I wanted and needed, because even though S4HANA is a newer solution and has newer capabilities, there are some advanced capabilities that ECC had or has that S4HANA does not yet have. So it's kind of a weird paradox with S4HANA and a lot of these newer cloud upgrades or newer versions of software in the cloud, is that these are rewrites. I mean, these cloud solutions are complete rewrites of the software. It's a redevelopment of the software on a new architecture, new platform, because it's cloud, not on-prem. So it's not just as simple as like we just took the code from on-prem and moved over to the cloud. It's a complete rewrite. So on one hand, you're creating these new capabilities. You have an opportunity to, bake AI into it and all this cool stuff. On the other hand, it just takes time to build that maturity that ECC had for decades. I mean, you had decades of R&D and innovation going into that product, especially for manufacturers. That was actually one of the, I skipped over it, but he was actually asking about manufacturing in particular, but I tried to broaden the question a little bit. But some of that maturity is not yet in the S4HANA yet. So I would do S4HANA if I knew that it could satisfy my needs, and if I knew that the customization I had in ECC, which this is a huge deal, the customization I've built in ECC, I was confident that I could untangle that and have a good path forward to how I'm going to adopt off the shelf, fit to standard S4HANA. Because with S4HANA Cloud, especially public cloud, which is where SAP is pushing most of their customers or trying to push their customers, you just don't have the flexibility that you did in ECC. You can't go in and customize the same way you did. You can do these customizations outside the system, sort of extensions, but it's not like ECC where you could go in and actually change the code. You change the code and the way the software is built with the, ABAP programmers and people that know, the SAP proprietary languages. And I'm not saying you should either. I mean, a lot of that customization for a lot of SAP customers probably wasn't necessary, but I think it's arrogant for any of us to say that that was a big mistake for companies to customize it all, because SAP is not perfect. SAP has pretty significant deficiencies or mismatches between what a lot of companies need and what SAP provides. And so it's inevitable that any complex or larger organization is going to need a certain amount of customization, or at least if they want to be successful in running their business and get value out of the system, they may need it. So these legacy customers have all this intellectual property and in many cases competitive advantages built into ECC because they built customized solutions and workflows that were specific to them that gave them a distinct advantage. Now to say like, we're going to throw that all out, just go clean core, get rid of the customization, just forget about the data, just start from scratch and use best practices in S4HANA. Not only is that arrogant, but that's reckless and dangerous, because what that suggests is that your business doesn't matter. The decades, or in some cases 100, 200 years you've been in business doesn't matter. What matters is what SAP does. And to me, that's an arrogant way to look at your customers, and to suggest that as a technology company, you know best about what a manufacturer should do, or a manufacturer in your space. You may have competitive, unique advantages that you want. And therefore, because it's unique, it means that SAP does not know how to do that. It's not able to do that. So if you're better at certain things because you built a mousetrap, a secret way or a secret sauce of doing things, SAP doesn't know how to do that. And you're not going to find it in S4HANA. So what are you going to do about it? It becomes a question. So I think the least viable option is to just migrate from ECC to S4HANA. But the problem is that's the most attractive to SAP. SAP absolutely wants you to move from ECC to S4HANA. To them, there's no other answer. Why would you do anything but that? But the reality is you have a lot of options. You don't have to do that. The other option you mentioned here, which actually this is the most common one we're seeing right now with SAP customers, is implementing a fresh copy of S4HANA with the new business strategy and keeping ECC as a standalone system. I'm not saying run two parallel systems, but the reason I think this is actually the best one, or one of the more common ones, is because we're seeing a lot of companies that are shrinking their footprint of SAP and looking for different standalone systems. And actually, this is his third option. I'm mixing the two together. I'm going to jump ahead to his third one, which is keep ECC as the core of data and data input, and then integrate multiple third-party systems based on that need. So the most common thing we're seeing, and it's sort of a hybrid between the two things that you're saying here, Mohammed. The most common thing we're seeing is customers are saying, let's shrink our SAP footprint in ECC, shrink it to what it needs to be, sort of just shrink it to what SAP is good at, and not try to make it be everything to our entire organization. Let's shrink it, then replace S4HANA, and then figure out what the other bolt-on systems are to augment that core S4HANA platform going forward. What I would not do is just assume that you're going to put in S4HANA as a one-size-fits-all and it's going to somehow be as good as ECC, because I think you'll be very disappointed to find that it's not going to be as good as ECC. It's going to give you some new stuff, with AI, like with Joule and some of the predictive analytics. The HANA platform is pretty cool. It's very high performance. It can process quickly. It helps a ton with analytics and data analysis, which is great. But you've got those advantages, but all the stuff, there's a lot of stuff that just basic core manufacturing and distribution supply chain stuff that ECC was really good at, especially if you built customization that was specific to you, that you're going to lose in S4HANA. And that's the question you have to ask yourself is, are you willing to invest a ton of money to get locked into SAP's roadmap only to find that it doesn't do what you need it to do or what you want it to do longer term? And if you think about it, if every organization in your industry were to migrate to S4HANA cloud, off the shelf, fit to standard, you all start to look the same. And at some point that model breaks because you can't have, 10 people that are competing with one another operating the exact same way. We're running the same platform, same processes, same everything. That means you have no advantage, which means you're not competing and you're not changing. It means you're beholden to SAP. So you've got to ask yourself what the right path forward is there. And I think that's where a lot of customers get stuck, is they don't know where to go from there. So thank you for that great question there, Mohammed. So here's a question from Brian on LinkedIn. Brian says, I've done the CBA, the cost benefit analysis for cloud with several customers. Can you expand on what the increased operating costs are for cloud? What if I could replace 1 to 2 IT FTEs with the cloud? Well, first of all, I think it's a great question. First of all, first I would ask, can you really replace 1 to 2 FTEs? I mean, that most business cases we've seen for the cloud overstate that benefit of being able to get rid of IT staff and whatnot, because typically what you're doing is, even if you do replace 1 to 2 FTEs, you're usually just replacing, more often than not, you're replacing with a different skill set. You're replacing with another FTE to do something different than what they were doing in on-prem. So it's rare that you see material headcount reductions in reality. Although, 10 years ago, I'd say all the vendors were building these robust business cases and cost benefit analysis that showed that all these savings that we could get if we could just cut our IT staff and get rid of all the servers, all that stuff. Well, the problem is getting rid of servers doesn't save you nearly as much money as it used to, because servers are cheap now. And more often than not, like I said, replacing an FTE usually just means you're replacing them with someone different, with a different skill set, if you're replacing them at all. But having said that, let's say you can reduce 1 to 2 FTEs. What you have to do is now you have to look at the cost side of the equation and look at what that ongoing cost is. And here's the problem. You don't know what it is. Like, you have no way to forecast what the cost of cloud is. Even if you're fortunate enough to, negotiate some locked in terms for, say, 3 years, let's just say you're able to convince them that they're not going to raise prices beyond the consumer price index, or they're not going to raise their subscription costs at all. Let's just say you lock that in for 3 years. Who knows what the hell is going to happen after 3 years? They could jack it up 10 to 20%. In fact, if you read, there's been a lot of articles lately around, I think it was Microsoft and or Salesforce customers kind of lashing back, or there's some backlash because they're raising their cloud costs just arbitrarily by 10 to 20% year over year. And to me, that is ridiculous. I mean, that is just not sustainable. It's not predictable. And I don't know how you build a business case for cloud when you don't have any control or visibility into what the pricing is going to be long term. So I guess that's a long way of saying I would assume the worst. What if the vendors decide they want to jack up the prices 10 to 20% a year? What does that look like? What if you need to switch your cloud provider in 10 years from now? How painful is that going to be to get your data out of the system and to walk away? It's a lot more. I think it's a lot more difficult to switch cloud providers than it is on-prem, because you don't own the data or the applications or anything. So just getting it out of the system and being able to manage that transition in parallel is a lot more difficult than if you control the legacy system that you're replacing, and if you have ownership of it. So great question. Building a business case for cloud, in my opinion, is difficult. For many, it's more of a strategic play of, I'm just going to get rid of technical debt, and this is my path forward to make sure that I'm up to date on new technology. And that's okay. If that is your business case or your justification, that's your prerogative. But I would just make sure you have a very clear vision and strategy for what you want to get out of the cloud beyond just the fact that you have to move to the cloud. So good question. Thank you for that. Here's from Carl on LinkedIn. Carl says, worth bringing risk into the conversation here. The cloud, SaaS, ERP organizations today face constant change in their technology landscape, as well as other commercial off-the-shelf platforms such as Salesforce, Workday, SAP, and Oracle Cloud. The risk of this is on our customer C-level priorities now. These systems evolve rapidly with frequent updates, new releases, and shifting compliance requirements. For organizations in highly regulated industries, this pace of change introduces significant operational compliance and security risks. Managing these risks manually is costly, complex, and often reactive. This is where we've applied AI across ERP and enterprise landscape to automate testing validation. So great question there. Thank you for the comment and question there. I think that's a great one. This is from Patrick on LinkedIn. Patrick says, customizations in the systems are the advantages of the company in the competitive markets. Like you said, Eric, let's focus first on the business, then the technology. Thank you for that. Totally agree. Yeah, I just, the customization thing it bothers me because, first of all, customization is not always bad. I know, we as an industry, especially in the technology, the technology provider industry, tend to suggest that customers that customize are bad. They are the problem. They can't change. They've created complexity that's unnecessary. They, the vendor, have all the answers. Why don't you just follow our best practices? That arrogance, that hubris, that misleading mentality is what gets companies into so many problems. And I don't know what to do about that. I've been trying for 25 years to figure out how to change the mindset of this industry, but that's one that really bothers me because you look at some of these big SAP customers that are using ECC. In many cases, they've been on ECC for 10, 20 years, and they've spent those years building capabilities and nuances and fine-tuning their business model all within SAP, the platform that they were sold 10 or 20 years ago. They were sold as, the next generation of technology. And now, and by the way, it was sold as a flexible solution. You could bring in these SAP developers to do different, changes to your software and workflows. They were happy to do it back then, when they were making money off you customizing. But now that we're trying to move everyone to the cloud, we're looking back on that saying that was a bad thing and you're the problem. You shouldn't have customized. Well, guess what? The entire industry benefited from you customizing. And yes, maybe you customized too much, but there's probably some stuff that you built that's secret sauce that's going to give you an advantage. And why would you throw that out just because SAP says they have best practices? Again, that's a level of arrogance that I will never understand and I will never stop lashing out at or raging against, if you will, because I think it's super dangerous and just unethical, to be candid. So here's another, I'm going to throw this in just because I'm already on a triggered a triggered rabbit hole here. I just posted a video the other day on YouTube. It's called Long Live ECC. And it's about how there's something to be said about sticking to your legacy system. And that is not cool to say. It doesn't make me a futurist necessarily. It doesn't make me a cool technological guru that is saying all the right things about the future of technical debt and AI first strategies and cloud first environments. I know that's the cool stuff to say, but what if you were to back up and look at this and say, well, let's just look at our business. What if we just use ECC because it's working really well? And what if we're getting great value out of it? And by the way, we've paid for it. We already own it. We're just paying maintenance and support. Maybe we go get some third-party maintenance and support from Spinnaker or Rimini Street that buys us some leeway or runway until 2040. What if we just did that? Is that so crazy just to stay on a system that's pretty good? There's nothing wrong with it. It's not, maybe it doesn't have Joule and all the really, really cool advanced stuff that, by the way, isn't even available yet, but it will be someday, allegedly, in S4HANA. But forget that. You're supposed to migrate now because S4HANA will eventually be awesome. But you already know ECC is awesome potentially. So why would you shift? So I think, the premise of the video is just being unbiased and objective about this and playing devil's advocate and asking why. Why do I want to move to S4HANA? And that's a big question that I always ask clients. I always say why. And my parents used to complain that I would ask why too much as a kid. And clients sometimes complain too that I say why too much as a 52-year-old adult. But the reason is because, if you can't understand why you're doing something, then why are you doing it? If you can't explain the real simple question of why do you want to move away from ECC or why do you move to S4HANA, or it's not just SAP, it's any digital transformation, any sort of technology upgrade, you should ask yourselves why. And if you can't have a clear answer to that, something other than like, well, Gartner says that, everyone should do it, or SAP told me I've got too much technical debt that I need to get rid of. Okay, that's just garbage. It's marketing spin. It's vendor fueled industry research that is paid for, that makes you feel like you're getting objective research. You're not. You're getting, if Gartner tells you, it's because the vendors are paying Gartner to promote a certain message. So you're just getting third-party validation from the same source, which is the vendors who pay the analyst to tell you that stuff. So set that all aside. That's all noise. That's just BS in the marketplace that you've got to deal with. You've got to set that aside and now look at your business and figure out, what is my real business case? That's why I like the question earlier from whoever asked it a moment ago about, I think it was Carl that asked it about Brian asked this on LinkedIn about the business case, because there's so many times where we say, what is your business case to move to whatever platform? And client can't answer it. They say, well, we have to do this. Why? We don't need a business case. We have to move to the cloud. We have to go AI first. We have to upgrade because SAP told us we have to, or Microsoft is sunsetting their, Great Plains, and we've got to move to Dynamics 365. Those are reasons, but those alone are terrible reasons to make the move. If that's your only reason, you've got a real problem on your hands because you don't have any clear direction for the project. And I can almost assure you your project's going to run into severe problems because you don't have any clear direction. You don't have a clear strategy. You don't have a clear vision. You don't have a clear future state. And by the way, the software vendors and the system integrators and technical implementers are going to take you way off track. They're going to take you down these rabbit holes and detours. They're going to cost you way too much time and money. It's noise. It's technology you don't need. And it's probably not aligned with your business. So you need to have a clear vision and a better reason than just, I'm being forced to migrate. And again, this isn't just an SAP problem. I'd say SAP is the most guilty. If I had to pick one vendor, I'd say SAP is absolutely the most guilty and the most unethical in how they handle their customers and the upgrades. But there's plenty of other vendors that aren't too far behind SAP in pursuing a very similar strategy. Even if it's slightly less aggressive or less abrasive, it's still from the same playbook in many cases. So here's another one I want to chat about. This is a prediction that I have for the coming year around change management. Every year I do predictions or thoughts for the next year. It always involves change management. But it reminds me of my wife went to Michigan State in the United States. And if you follow college athletics, you may know that Michigan State is an okay athletic team. They're not very good at American football. They're pretty good at times in basketball. And it's college basketball season just started here in the U.S. And she says every year, this is Michigan State's year. This is it. This is their year. And the last 14 years that I've been with my wife, it's been their year. And this is the 14th year in a row. It's been their year, except it never is. But this time, so I feel like that's what I'm saying here with change management, because every time I do predictions is about change management. This is the year that we're really going to start to get change management. And I feel like my wife in many ways by doing this or saying this, but I will say that change management is definitely becoming more of a boardroom issue. Whether or not this is the year that it's the tipping point or not, or maybe it's next year, it's happening finally. I've been saying it for a long time, but it just hasn't happened the way I thought it would. But I do think it's happening now because technology is changing so fast and changing faster than it ever has. The pace of change is accelerating exponentially. And what that's doing is that's putting more pressure on organizations, and it's putting more pressure on the current state. It's putting more pressure on the employee workforce because now the changes are widening. So in other words, like in the past, technology was changing, but the gap might have been like this between current state, future state. Now it's like this because you've got AI and cloud and analytics and all, composable ERP, platform as a service, all these crazy technologies are changing so quickly that gap between current state and future state is just growing like that. And it's putting so much pressure on people right now on change management. And so I think change management is absolutely becoming more of a boardroom issue. I know that now compared to 5 or 10 years ago, it's amazing to me how many executives actually understand the word change management. 10 years ago, I would say the word change management. A lot of times executives or leaders would say, what is change management? That sounds like a fluffy, rah-rah, kumbaya, let's feel good about each other sort of exercise that we don't necessarily need to do. Now they actually get it. They know that change management is important. They know that the people side of the story, in many cases, they understand that it's more important than technology. But in most cases, they understand that it's important, even if they don't think it's more important than technology. But the problem is now the next problem in the evolution here of change management is now executives don't understand what exactly change management means. They know change management is important. They know that people first is important. They may even understand that change management is more important than technology, but they don't understand what change management is. Like, what is it beyond just focusing on people? And this is where, again, the industry creates problems, because the industry would say, or a software vendor or a technical implementer, like if you're working with one of the big four system integrators like Deloitte or Accenture, or even, any smaller tech provider too is going to do the same thing. They're going to say, oh yeah, we've got change management covered. We do communications, which to them is typically like project updates. Like, yeah, we're going to help you send letters to the team talking about, milestones and deadlines. That's not change management. That's like a tiny irrelevant portion of change management. And then they'll say, and we're going to do training. We're going to do training and enablement. We're going to train your trainers on how to use the software. Well, your software is just one small piece. It's an important piece, but it's a small piece of a broader digital transformation or business change initiative. So change management has to focus on not just how do I use a system, but how does my job change? How does my workload change? How does my day-to-day workflow change? What happens to the tools I'm using today? So I use a set of spreadsheets that I created. I have got stuff in my head, the tribal knowledge in my head. I'm the single source of truth in many cases for the current workflows. So what's going to happen when you take all that away from me? And right there, you can start to see how someone might push back on that and say, well, wait a minute, if I'm not going to be as important because now you don't rely on what's in my head, you're now going to codify and automate all this stuff in the system. Now you're taking the spreadsheet that I built that spreadsheet with pride, 10 years ago. And I've been fine tuning that thing to where no one else can understand how that spreadsheet works. And now you're telling me it's going to be in a core ERP system, or AI is going to do it for me, or whatever. That's a threat. And you're pulling the rug out from under me when you start to say that. So that's why change management becomes more and more important, is because the disruption, the impact to people is greater than ever, especially when you add to the context, or you add the backdrop that AI is replacing tens of millions, hundreds of millions of jobs in the next 10 years, or whatever the latest study would show, or employees are just getting tired and sick of hearing about all this AI stuff. It's so mainstream and so talked about right now that I think people are getting tired of it, and they're skeptical and leery of whether or not it's a real thing, or whether or not it's just a bunch of hype. And if it is not just a bunch of hype, and if it is a real thing, then it becomes more of a threat, in which case change management becomes even more important. So that's where we have to really focus on how we manage change and ensure that we have a robust change program that'll allow people to be successful in their journeys on the front lines. So another thing that I want to share, this isn't actually it actually just came up from the chat. There were some comments flowing here on one of the platforms that I was watching, and let me go to where I need to be here. So one of the things that we're seeing more of, we talked a bit about AI as the new ERP, but one thing that we're seeing a big shift in, and this is something we're embracing and we're leaning heavily into as a consulting firm, is the use of AI in implementations. This is something that's really important because, and again, this is top of mind because I was just at a client this week, SAP project kickoff. The system integrator is just starting to get involved, the SAP system integrator. We're providing the overall program management, the change management, really the client side implementation focused stuff. And then the SI is doing the SAP stuff. And then we manage all the other non-SAP pieces like the architecture, the data migration, the integration, the change management, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason I bring this all up is we're looking at the system integrator's plan and saying, why are we still following these manual processes for implementing new technology? It's costly. It takes extra time. It costs the client more money when we have AI tools that can be used to do that. And I'm going to share with you one other thing here that's pretty cool. And it's something called Mission Control AI. It's something that we use. It's an agnostic tool set. It's tech agnostic. We use it for SAP implementations, but we also use it for Oracle, Microsoft, NetSuite, all sorts of implementations, even non-ERP. We're using it for some AI deployments, some CRM deployments, even electronic medical record deployments. All these different types of systems that we're deploying will use AI not just to capture information like from workshops and things like that, but to analyze mass amounts of information we learn about a client through workshops and through deliverables that we create and through current state deliverables and documentation that we plug into the model. And what it does, and it's this mission control tool right here. If you scan this, you can learn more about it, but it's really cool. It's something we use in our consulting practice because it allows us to analyze and benchmark clients to other clients we've worked with. So we're in the process right now of loading up hundreds of clients, their deliverables, the documentation, the analysis, the results, keeping it confidential, but using that raw data to train the AI tool so that now when we do a new implementation or an evaluation of potential technologies, we have this rich data set that AI can help us analyze. And the reason I bring this all up is because now, like with this client we're working with, we've been doing some phase 0 work for about 3 months. And we've captured all this mass amount of data around the current state, what they want to accomplish going forward, where the bones are buried, the warts in the operations. And AI is allowing us to speed up the process of defining requirements and starting to get into what the design should be of the new system. But the system integrator comes in and they want to, put their blinders on or put their heads down and do things the way they've always done, which is we're going to conduct these workshops. We're going to do things sort of that manual, slow, labor-intensive way where we're saying, hey, we've got this, a lot of this already captured in the AI tool. Let's use that for analyzing what the design requirements are and what the business process changes are. It's certainly informing the change management side of things in terms of who's going to be impacted and how. What are the major changes to the operations and to the people? How are we going to train people? What are the requirements for the new systems? All that stuff. So the reason I bring all this up is, you should be challenging your implementer or your consulting partner to look at how are you going to use AI to speed things up and save me money. It's one thing to say it because it's cool. I mean, I'll be honest, this is a very cool tool. This mission control AI is awesome. I love it. And I think it's a very unique thing that Third Stage has that others don't have, especially because it's tech agnostic. And we can use it to draw real subjective data or objective data from clients and compare it to others and understand, what industry norms are and where potential improvements might happen for a client, all that good stuff. But it should ultimately, at the end of the day, save you money, not only give you better results, but save you money. And so that's one thing I see happening too, is that AI will start to change and transform how implementers, especially technical implementers that are used to offshoring development and things like that to other countries. Now AI can be doing a lot of that work for you. Brian on LinkedIn says, it's our year for OCM. Thank you for jumping on my bandwagon here. And while you're at it, go Michigan State, Sparty on if anyone happens to be a Michigan State fan. I'm not actually, I mean, I married into becoming a Michigan State fan. But my college unfortunately did not have a football team. So I by default just root for her team. Craig Levy says, love the comments on change management. We see so many change managers who focus on placing posters in the canteen and sending emails to end users, but they ignore management. So the executives continue as if they are still in the 90s. It's a great line. I feel like I should use that for a video or something, or a social media post. I might have to steal that from you, Craig, if you don't mind. That's a great point. I appreciate your feedback here. So great stuff. Thank you for all the comments here. Brian says, thanks. I appreciate the perspective. So great stuff. Thank you for that. So I'd love to hear from you, even though we're going to wrap this up now. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the chat, because after I'm done with these discussions, I always go back to the chat and keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think I missed? What do you disagree with? What do you agree with? What would you add to the mix of what organizations should be thinking about now in 2026 as they're planning their coming digital transformation initiative? Again, if you want to chat more with myself and our team to talk about transformation and give you some advice, some free advice on how to improve or how to get started, depending on where you are, I'm going to put up again this QR code right here for a free assessment. We have 3 different free assessments we offer clients. One is a health check of a project already underway. One is helping really define the roadmap. And even if you're not sure how to, which assessment to take advantage of, go ahead and click that link and it'll take you to a page where you can request time with our team to chat about your plans and your line of thinking for the coming year. And I love having the conversations too, even if you're not a paying client, because I just learned so much from it. And I learned so much from you all that are watching here and listening here today, which is why I also do these. All right. So that was our conversation around digital transformation playbooks for 2026 and some of the things you should be aware of. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to dive into that conversation a little bit more here with Darian in just a moment. We're also going to dive into the Zimmer Biomet SAP failure case study and some of the lessons learned there. We've got a lot more to cover in this episode of Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back. Stick around.
In a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 249. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to learn more about how to collaborate with us, feel free to reach out to us at Major Tom Productions. I've included contact information below of who you can reach out to there. So Darian, we just had this conversation about some of the plays to run or to be aware of or to potentially run in 2026 as you plan your digital strategy. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I always kind of love this time of year, looking into what the next year is going to entail and start to make all those different predictions and seeing kind of what it's shaping up to be. So one main question I have, Eric, is with AI, I feel like has changed so much, even just this year. How has AI changed the conversation around what ERP even means for these large organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it makes me wonder, and this is more of a unknown, so I don't have a definitive answer for you other than to say that I think the lines are blurring between AI, ERP, and just other categories of enterprise tech. But I do wonder, and I think if I were a betting man, I would bet on AI becoming more the center of focus or the center of gravity for big digital transformation. So in other words, in the past, ERP was the end all be all and everything revolved around ERP. If you could get one ERP to do 80 or 90% of what you needed it to do, great. Maybe you had a couple small bolt-ons and you integrate to them, you call it good. Now that model is becoming obsolete to where you're getting the composable ERP that we talked about, and then you're getting platforms, and now you're getting AI. And some vendors provide a combination of more than just one of those things. But I think with AI becoming more of a potential standalone system that also becomes the center of gravity or the interface between a human and the back office technology, Now I start to wonder if ERP over time will just become more of a glorified database, a glorified system of record that just transacts data and keeps track of data. But it's really the AI tool that allows you to draw from that data and interact with that data, not just within one ERP system too, by the way. Now it opens up the possibility to interact with multiple systems, but using the same AI tool. So, and there's also platforms that are doing both. They're providing a platform that becomes that front end GUI along with AI and some customized workflows tying back into legacy systems. And that's where Palantir and Snowflake and some of these, composable ERP providers or these interoperability vendor providers, that's where they're thriving. And that's what they're betting on, is the fact that their tool now is becoming the front end that customers or end users interact with. And that tool ends up calling on or drawing from the legacy system or systems that need to be drawn from. And in many cases, the end user doesn't ever see or interact directly with those back office systems. So I do wonder if AI now replaces ERP as that, focal point or center of gravity. I think that's probably going to happen to some degree. It's just what I don't know is how much that'll happen, or if ERP vendors will figure out a way to dominate the AI space in the same way they've dominated, the category they created.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question with this, Eric. For at least organizations that maybe go to the cloud or get onto a new ERP system, how can they protect themselves from contractually unpredictable 10 to 20% price hikes from vendors?
That's hard. And I mean, the easy answer that's not realistic to execute, it's a lot easier to say it than to execute it, would be to say, negotiate an increase or negotiate a maximum increase on cloud subscription increases. And you can do that. We've seen customers successfully do that in the short term, for the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. But doing it long term, beyond 3 years, or say 5 to 10 years out, there's usually not a provision, or they're not willing to negotiate, especially the big cloud providers. Now, you're going to have more luck with a smaller, mid-tier or a smaller cloud provider. They're going to be more likely to negotiate with you. But if you're negotiating with Microsoft or Oracle or SAP, good luck, because they're not going to budge on, and they're certainly not going to limit their ability to maximize their revenue and profit in the future, which is what they're betting on. They're betting on, by getting you into the cloud and getting you at a relatively attractive or a palatable annual subscription cost now, they'll find a way to increase your cost and the revenue they make from you long term, either because you are adding modules, or you're adding data, or you're adding transactions, or you're adding AI agents, or they just arbitrarily decide they want to increase the cloud cost. There are so many ways that vendors have to increase costs, and there's so many levers they can pull on. The latest one that's really interesting is just looking at how a lot of software vendors are pricing in for agents, charging per agent that's deployed within their application. There's an additional cost for that. And so it's almost like you're paying for an additional user or an additional module every time you add another agent, which is really interesting, because it really doesn't cost the vendor much more at all materially to add that one extra agent or 100 extra agents or whatever. And by the way, a lot of times these are agents that you build, or, they may have provided, pre-configured out of the box. But the cost to them is sort of a fixed cost. They've already incurred whatever cost they're going to incur. There's not much of a cost at all for you to add that, but yet they can charge you what they want to charge you. So it's all upside for the vendors. It's unfortunately not all upside for customers. So I would say the better strategy is to just be sure that you're very deliberate about where you go to the cloud, and diversify where you can, so you're not locked into one vendor. And maybe look at a hybrid strategy where you have some on-prem and you've got some cloud, and or at the very least, you've diversified your cloud provider. So if any one cloud provider is jacking up their cost, you have the option to replace it, and it wouldn't be quite as painful as ripping out your entire back office system with one cloud provider.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I always love looking into what 2026 is starting to look like and our predictions for it.
Yeah, likewise. It was fun conversation. And we're going to jump into now a case study of a recent SAP failure. This is a $172 million failure at Zimmer Biomet. It's a medical device company, global company, failed miserably in their implementation. But the good news, it was bad news for them, but the good news for us is there's a lot of good lessons we can take away from that case study. And failures always provide a rich source of lessons, because there's so many extreme examples of mistakes that were made by these companies that you can only learn from them. And there's things that you find that are not rocket science. This isn't difficult. It's not super complicated how to be successful and how to avoid failure. So let's play you this video from my YouTube channel where I talk about this case study, and we'll come back and discuss it in more detail.
A company called Zimmer Biomet is a company that provides and manufactures medical devices. They have a valuation of about $25 billion. They operate in 100 countries, and they have about 20,000 employees. They recently decided to embark on an SAP S4HANA implementation, and it was a complete disaster. Now, this is all despite the fact that they were promised the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, and those benefits and the business value they expect to get out of the implementation never materialized. In fact, they got the opposite in terms of business value. So what I wanted to do today is talk about some of the lessons learned, talk about what happened with this failure, and talk about what it means to you and some of the pitfalls that you can avoid as part of your SAP S4HANA implementation. Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to make your SAP project successful, I encourage you to read our Guide to Successful S4HANA Implementations. It contains a number of best practices and tips that we've seen from helping so many clients through their S4HANA implementations over the years. You can read that by scanning the QR code right here, or go to the links below. So what happened with this project? How did it become such a big failure? Well, it helps to rewind to the beginning and talk about how the project started. At the beginning of the project, the company was told by Deloitte that they would save anywhere from $100 to $200 million a year by implementing S4HANA. Those savings would come through inventory reductions and other efficiencies throughout the organization. However, that business value never materialized, and I'll talk here in a moment about what actually happened post-go-live. They were given a budget of about $69 million to pay Deloitte to do the implementation for them, and through a series of change orders over the years, they added an additional $23 million to the project, which is an overrun of about 30%, which is pretty significant when you're talking about a company this size and a project this size as well. So what happened in the actual project? Did they realize the $100 to $200 million of business benefits? Well, they didn't. They actually got negative business value out of the implementation, and I'll talk about what the post-SAP world looks like for Zimmer Biomet and how they ended up in a legal dispute. I'll talk about that here next. Now, despite being told that the company would gain somewhere between $100 to $200 million annually of business value, the company realized negative business benefits after they went live on S4HANA. They actually saw a decline in revenue of 1 to 1.5% that they publicly stated was a result of issues they had with their implementation. Now, just to give you some context, 1 to 1.5% revenue loss doesn't sound like a huge number, but in this case, that equated to about $75 million per year in lost business. In addition, this revenue loss that they publicly announced resulted in a $2 billion market capitalization hit to the value of the company. In addition, they had to lay off 3% of their workforce, which they largely tied back to the implementation and some of the troubles that they were having as a result of the implementation. And most of this was because they had delayed shipments. They couldn't ship product on time when customers expected them, so they actually lost market share, they lost orders that were canceled, and they lost out to competitors as well. Now, in addition, as if this wasn't all enough of a problem for Zimmer Biomet, another challenge was that they had executive departures, including their CEO. The CEO of the company left, they brought in new executive team members, and that created a bit of turmoil as well. And the other interesting thing that I would advise you not to do, that this company did, is that they decided to go live on the July 4th weekend in North America. And if you're from North America, you know that's a big summer holiday, and that is probably the worst time you would ask your employees to work extra to go live on a new system. So all of these things are signs and signals of a massive failure that could have been avoided, and that's what we'll talk about today, are some of the things that you can do to avoid some of the same challenges that they had during their implementation. So what are the lessons we can take away from this failure? Well, first of all, one thing I haven't mentioned so far is that the company sole sourced this implementation to Deloitte. They had been working with Deloitte on various different projects as a consultancy for about 25 years, and they didn't even put it out to bid, and they trusted that Deloitte knew their business well enough and would be a good partner through this implementation. Sounds reasonable enough, but it just goes to show that even the best intentioned partners can oftentimes find themselves in situations where they themselves are partially responsible for an implementation. In addition, there was corporate turmoil happening at the same time they were trying to go through their S4HANA implementation. And this isn't the first time we've seen this as a consulting organization either. When an organization is going through massive strategic changes, mergers and acquisitions, executive turnover, whatever the changes might be, that backdrop makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to succeed during an implementation. And that's why you want to make sure that you, at the very least, take these considerations into account and factor them into your overall planning. And best case scenario, you want to address those situations and those risks first before you start embarking too far on a big, massive digital transformation. Another lesson from this failure is that the company didn't seem to have control over their vendors. They didn't have the right governance in place to control Deloitte and their activities, and instead Deloitte ran the project, and through a series of change orders, they were able to maximize their revenue and profit, but ultimately that harmed this organization to the point where now they're suing for $172 million in damages. Another lesson from this failure at Zimmer Biomet is that you want to have realistic expectations and a realistic timeline and budget going into the project. Now, I don't know if the initial estimate here of $69 million for the S4HANA implementation was ever realistic, but given the fact that it ran 30% over, something was wrong there. And oftentimes we find that the initial budget that was set, the initial estimate was based on overly optimistic assumptions or unrealistic assumptions, which then leads to an unrealistic set of expectations around time and budget. So making sure you have a realistic timeline and budget in place and in mind is something that's very important as well. And then a final takeaway I'll leave you with here as it relates to this failure is how AI could have helped this project. And I know there's a lot of hype around AI right now, but one thing that you have to consider, especially if you're leveraging one of the big consultancies like a Deloitte, is you want to make sure that you're looking at ways that you can be using AI to automate what Deloitte has historically charged high rates for to produce. So for example, in the past, you would have offshore resources that you could offshore development to, or you might have junior resources that are creating a bunch of PowerPoint decks or training materials. A lot of that work now can be automated through AI, so you have to poke holes in the proposals you're getting from any big system integrator to ensure that they're taking advantage of AI and that you're getting the most efficient offering that you can get. Now, you don't want to be unrealistic about how AI can help your implementation, but it is something that should be driving down costs, not leading to massive overruns like was the case here. So these are some of the lessons and takeaways from this implementation, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the biggest failure points are here? Or what are some of the things that you think are most commonly the cause of S4HANA implementation failures? I'd love to hear your feedback below.
So that was a video I posted recently on YouTube that talks about the Zimmer Biomet SAP failure and some of the lessons learned there. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, like I said earlier today, one of our newsworthy articles was about a success story, and you can obviously learn from those, but I also think obviously you can learn from the failures as well, and what did well, what didn't do well, different things like that. So Eric, I have a couple follow-up questions for you on this video. One being, what were the early warning signs that mostly predict that SAP would have like this huge failure with the Zimmer Biomet?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the fact that it's SAP means that there might be a slightly higher failure rate to begin with, or the higher odds of failure, just because it's such a big, complex product. I mean, there's so many moving parts and pieces that it's just difficult to implement. But perhaps even more importantly is the fact that Zimmer Biomet is a large, complicated med device, highly regulated company that's global in nature. And by definition, that type of company is more likely to fail in whatever technology they're going to roll out. So going into the project, they had two strikes against them, or two big risk factors, which are big SAP complex product and big complex global highly regulated company. So those two things combined meant that they were starting in a highly precarious, risky situation to begin with. And then you add to the fact that, perhaps business processes weren't as well understood. Cultures were different. There were competing priorities within the organization. There was misalignment. There's a lot of differing opinions on what this project meant to the organization, and that caused and led to a lot of the failure as well. So you add up all these things and you look at it, and it's not a surprise that it failed. But the question is, well, what could they have done differently? Knowing that they're implementing SAP, knowing that they're a complex company, you can't change that. And you're probably not going to change SAP either, because a company like that probably needs a product like SAP, or at least one that can be as robust and complex as they are as a company. But that just means you've got to be extra diligent about how you set up your PMO, how you manage change, how you execute against your phase zero and do all the planning up front. The problem with a company like Zimmer Biomet too, by the way, is that it's such a big company that for a software vendor and a technical implementation partner, it is a big cash cow or a big potential cash cow. So it's almost like hyenas in the wilderness. They see that there's a bunch of money about to be spent, so they're going to throw as many bodies at this project as possible because they can turn this into a big, massive project. And $172 million price tag maybe is not good for Zimmer Biomet, but guess who benefited from the fact that they failed in their implementation? And that was SAP and their implementer. So that's the perverse, misaligned expectations in this industry that causes a lot of problems. Is one client's failure is actually a vendor and an implementation partner's benefit. They're more profitable. So I don't know of many industries where you're actually incentivized to fail. You have an economic incentive to fail. Now, of course, long term, you can't do that. It's not sustainable because SAP gets a black eye every time they see, one of these failures hit the news, and the implementation partner gets a black eye or bruise as well. Although I will say, despite the black eyes and the negative press and the high failure rates, SAP and these big implementation partners still find ways to sell plenty of new projects where they can do the same thing over and over again because they have the cachet or the brand recognition and the trust built with their names, which is ironic because you could argue that these are the least trusted partners you should be working with in the market, but because it's a big name, it's recognizable, executives and leaders oftentimes feel safe. So it's a long way of saying you've got to get control of these projects. You have to know that there's a economic incentive to bill you more and to have you take longer to go through the project, and you have to take control of the project. The only way around this is you've got to establish your PMO, bring in a third-party agnostic provider like our company at Third Stage. We're not affiliated with SAP. We're not here to put 20 or 30 bodies on a project. We're only here to help you, a client, manage the project better and to put the right guardrails in place and to make sure that the technology and the technology providers don't steamroll you and your business into a project that leads to a $200 million loss for you, but a $200 million gain for your partners. So that's the only way around it, is to make sure that you have complete control. And I know it sounds very draconian, or it's not cool to talk about control or command and control, but bigger companies need to step up here and stop being so helpless. You've got the team, you've got the sophistication, you've got the leadership to do it, you've got the leverage to do it. Use it. I don't know why these companies are giving up so much control to SAP or their partners. Just take control and take ownership of it. I mean, that's the best advice I could give to any company that's about to go through an SAP project.
For sure. And I would say that's a mic drop moment from you, Eric.
Thank you.
But yeah, that definitely makes sense. Great insight for different companies. And it was a great conversation today.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a fun conversation and great interaction from the audience as well, especially as we're talking about our predictions for 2026. But again, love to hear from you. What do you think? What can we expect here in 2026? What do we miss? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What would you add to the list, either as it relates to predictions for 2026, the future of SAP, the future of composable ERP, all the stuff we talked about in this episode? I'd love to hear your feedback. And it always gives us good conversation points for this podcast and other YouTube content that we create and other shorts and other stuff that we do. So anything you share can and will be read and absorbed by us. So thank you in advance for sharing that. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Be sure to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com to see any past episodes you might have missed. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this content with your peers, anyone you think might benefit. We'd love and appreciate you getting this out to as many people as possible just to spread the word. So hope you have a great day. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime. Take care.